Hey everybody, it's Handsome Aaron here, and I just watched a movie called Nino Kuni, uh, which was not very good, and I wanted to talk about it. Uh, you might be wondering why. I should set up my chair better. You might be wondering why I want to talk about it, and I don't know why. Uh, well, I do know why, but we'll get to why. No, it's a kind of random movie to want to watch, just like an anime. It's like a year old, but I just randomly threw it on, and I had to talk about it here at the end. Um, it's not a great movie. It's it's not a terrible movie. It's a very boring movie, uh, which can be okay. There's a lot of kind of boring movies I quite like, but usually it's because they're more like contemplative or something. This movie is not. This movie wants to be a fun kids kind of adventure movie, and it just completely fails at that, and it's just very boring. Uh, Even though it starts off pretty uh, engaging. It's one of the very first things that happens in the movie. Okay, let me back up a little bit here. If you've never seen this movie, I guess I'll say right now I don't recommend that you do. Uh, but it sounds familiar to you. It's because there's also Nino Kuni video games, uh, which are okay. They're like these JRPGs. I'm not a big fan of JRPGs, but I have played them, and they're all right. They have basically nothing to do with this movie. Uh, they have such little to do with the movie. They that you can watch them and understand it. They're not narratively connected to the video games, but there's one character who's around, so it's just enough connected to the video games to be very confusing for people who aren't familiar with them to the people that haven't played them, or at least the first one. I don't think it has any connection to the second one, but this movie carries on kind of a tradition of those two games of something really fucked up happening right at the start, and then the rest of the story never getting anywhere near that dark. In the first game, it's that the kid's mom dies, and it's pretty sad. And then something like that never happens again. The second game starts off with a nuclear blast for some reason. Like a nuclear bomb goes off and kills everybody, which is just bizarre for a game like that. And again, nothing like that ever happens again. It's just like very happy, friendly world and story, pretty much. And this movie does the same thing, where the very first thing that really happens is that this chick gets like stalked and then stabbed through the stomach, right through the gut with a knife, in a way that's actually kind of freaky. Like it's not particularly graphic, but there's some quality about it. Maybe that it does just feel out of place, like something so grim happening in what is supposed to be like a kids movie, that makes it kind of unsettling, surprisingly so. But then nothing like that ever comes up again. Um, uh, and other than that, it really has nothing to do with the games. It doesn't even feel like it's set in the same world as the games, even though it's supposed to be. But I guess the basic premise of the movie is that these two high school kids, I think one's named Yu, which might be short for Yusuke, which is really strange for me because I love Yu Hakusho, and if I hear the name Yusuke, I just think Yusuke Urameshi from Yu Hakusho. And then the other one's name is Haru, which is also pretty funny. Um, and their friend, one of Haru's girlfriend, gets stabbed, and they almost get hit by a truck, and they get transported to another extremely generic fantasy world. Um, and they run around. They kind of become like heroes there, and a war starts, and it's that kind of movie. I think the term is isekai, uh, the story where they kind of go to another fantastical world, but it's this super generic fantasy world, um, and they can kind of come back. That's a thing that comes into the movie a little bit, um, like between the fantasy world and the real world. So it's about these two kids, and at the start of the movie, if something about it reminded me a lot of The Cat Returns, the Ghibli movie, kind of an underrated Ghibli movie, but the I don't know what it is, and that was before I realized that one of the kids' name is actually Haru, which is the main character's name in The Cat Returns, which was kind of a weird moment. But they first of all, I hate the two main characters. They're both incredibly generic. There's not a whole lot to either of them, other than one is very earnest, I guess, and then the other one is kind of actually a little bit nuts and just seems obsessed with this girl. Um, well, one of them is also in a wheelchair. The you character, is in a wheelchair, and I thought that's strange. Not strange that he's in a wheelchair, but you don't see that very often. And but then when they go through, they get pulled into the fantasy world. He's not in a wheelchair; he can walk. Uh, and that's interesting. I mean, it's not interesting on its own, but like, it's so weird because the fact that he's in a wheelchair in the real world but can walk in the other world, like, never matters. He almost doesn't react to the fact that he can walk in the other world. He like briefly reacts to it right when they get there. But then that just never comes up again, and when they start going back to the real world too, and he's in a wheelchair again, he doesn't seem to care. It's incredibly strange. At first I thought that that's kind of a good thing. Um, well, not necessarily a good thing, but I thought, you know what? If I was disabled, if I was like in a wheelchair, I might appreciate that there's like this character, he's got a disability, pretty serious one, and the movie just doesn't make a big deal out of it. Not saying you normally see. I would think, especially in saying you don't really see in like an anime. But then I thought about it for like a second, and I realized that actually no, I don't think that is like. I mean, I don't know. I'm not in a wheelchair, but I can't imagine if I was, it would be something I'd be happy to see. Because one, um, while yeah, the character is in a wheelchair and they don't make a big deal about it, in the other world he can walk. So, uh, and it's only in the other world where he can walk that he's actually like doing things, like plot relevant things. So it's not really like, oh, he's in a wheelchair, but it doesn't really matter. Like in this particular story that they're telling, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to go with that angle. Um, Fucking amazing as it would have been if he had just like, if in the fantasy world he was also in a wheelchair, and he's still doing all the same shit, like running around and fighting medieval battles and stuff, just in a wheelchair. That would have been awesome. But no. And then also the fact that he doesn't react, like I said, to like to the fact that he can walk sometimes and sometimes can't, just makes it so completely detached from any reaction I think any actual person with a disability would have to that situation. Um. Anyway, I've kind of gone on about that a bit. So this movie is what makes this movie so bad? Well, the characters are all very bland. Um, is one, and the movie is incredibly strangely paced. This might as well be called exposition. This is the anime adaptation of the concept of exposition. Characters just spend ages in this movie way over explaining shit. And at times where things are like kind of happening in the plot, and they just stop and just reiterate the same shit over and over. They argue about the same things over and over. And then huge segments of the movie are just like meaningless. And it's okay to have stuff in movies that is like doesn't necessarily further the plot, although I really in a well written story, basically everything should serve the plot in some way. Um, but here, the movie is an hour and 40 minutes long for a story that I think you could probably tell in like 30. This is like a 30-minute short story stretched to be over the length of a normal length movie. Um and it is not interesting to watch for most of it, except for when it's so bad it's kind of funny. Um but even that doesn't happen very often. Um and despite scenes, all these scenes where characters are just talking about what's happening, basically, there's all these other hilarious moments where characters just kind of suddenly in an instant know things that they should not know. Um, there, there's a moment. So there's a really odd mechanic to how the sort of um, magic works in relation to. I'm gonna fix this light. So there's this really weird mechanic to how the magic works in terms of how they get to the fantasy world and how they get back to the real world, which is that they have to like almost die. They have to do something that will possibly kill them. And again, like the way they figure this out is that the main character, one of the two main characters, the I think it was the you character, just just kind of says it at one point. He just figures, well, the first time we came here, we were almost hit by a truck, so let's do that again. And just based on that hunch, which is correct, like basically when they suddenly just know things, it's supposed to be that it's the truth because the writer knows that it's true. Um, they just hurl themselves into a fucking fire. Like based on this hunch that they have to almost die, they both just in an instant go like okay, and then jump into a fire, which ultimately they try to jump into a fire and then like they basically end up jumping off a building instead, but still it works. They get like grabbed out of midair and kind of pulled into the back into the real world. But because I think that even the writers seem to realize how strange it is that that they would do that they would jump into a fire. So rather than rewrite it so they don't do that, they just have it be that they miss the fire and fall off a building instead. Um, it's also pretty inconsistent, that element of the magic, because they at different points they kind of almost die at other times and then don't get transported to the other world. So I think that they kind of forgot about it. Like towards the end of the movie, one of the kids gets stabbed through the back and is like laying on the ground, fucking bleeding to death. I mean, he doesn't teleport, because that would ruin, I guess, the drama of the scene. I think they realize that that's weird. I say weird a lot in these videos. I've got this big shadow casting from my chin onto my neck, and I don't know what to do about it. Um, uh, what else is there in this movie? So they oh god, I just watched it and it's so like it's already kind of leaving my head. A lot of the movie's so forgettable. They they so there's oh god. Well, let's talk about the Miyazaki thing. That's a good example. So this movie is not a Studio Ghibli movie. Don't be confused by that. And I say that because the game, the Nino Kuni game, the first one, was co was Studio Ghibli helped out with it. It wasn't a Studio Ghibli didn't make the game, but they there's a couple of cutscenes in it that are traditional hand drawn Ghibli cutscenes, and I think they might have helped out in some way with the general aesthetic and look of the game. Uh, but that's it. Ghibli was just involved in the first Nino Kuni game. They had nothing to do with the second one, and they had nothing to do with this movie. But it does kind of look like Ghibli. Like I said, something about the very early parts, like the first like 2 minutes of the movie, made me think of Cat Returns. Um, there's like an airship later in the movie that kind of looks like the kind of airship that Hayao Miyazaki would design and put in his movie if he was like hungover that day and wasn't really feeling it. Which is a good example of like a scene that just serves no purpose because they go on a whimsical ride on an airship, but and then it just and then they stop being on a whimsical ride in an airship, and the airship never comes back. I thought it was going to come back during the final battle or something, but it doesn't. There's like a bird that shows up. I don't know. Um, and then there's another bit that feels like it's straight out of Kiki's Delivery Service. There's the at one point they're in like a bar. That's a weird thing. This movie is clearly for kids, but they spend a lot of time in a bar with like a pole dancer. There's like a bunny girl pole dancer that feels kind of out of place. Uh, but anyway, the owner they've done something to like help the princess at this point, and the owner of the older lady that owns the bar, it's not a bakery, it's a bar, goes to them and is like, I have a spare room and you can use it. That's like attached to the bar, just like the spare room Kiki stays in that's attached to the bakery. And maybe houses that look like this are more common in Japan, but I've never seen it. The moment you actually see the place, it it at least I think in my head it looks exactly like the place that Osano, I think her name is Osano, lets Kiki stay in Kiki's Delivery Service. Uh, uh, which also doesn't matter. Like, it it's another thing that just happens because he literally never even goes inside the apartment. Like, we never see what it looks like on the inside. It's just another thing that happens to make this hour 40-minute movie longer. uh, so there's this one thing I actually like about this movie. It's like a strange little. So there's like the two worlds in the movie, the real world and the fantasy world, and there's this concept I really like, which is that people, and it's unclear whether it's everyone or just some people, are connected between the worlds. You have like really there's only like one example of this, well, or actually there's two. We'll come back to that. I need to explain the mechanics of how this works because we'll come to the reason I wanted to make this review. There's really only one example, and it's the princess character in the other world and this like high school chick in the real world. And the high school chick is the girlfriend of the Haru character, and the idea is that they look alike and they are like the same person but different worlds. They like share a soul, and it's established that if you do something to one, it will can affect the other. And so the plot early on is that a guy shows up and he stabs the high school chick to the stomach in order to like kill the princess in the other world. That's a cool idea, actually. Um, of like assassinating someone by killing the person they're connecting to. Like a princess would be difficult to kill, so just kill this high school chick, and that'll do the job too. That's actually kind of neat. And there's other ways that the movie does try to integrate the idea that things in one world affect the other, but it never does it particularly um, well. it never does it particularly well, and then in addition to being kind of, what am I trying to say here? Uh, it never does that very well, but that's kind of the part of the plot. There's like this kind of inconsistent stuff where like later there's like a battle happening and it makes the hospital that the is on fire, makes a hospital catch on fire in the real world, and um for some reason, a big part of the plot. Okay, so this is the thing. Like I said, the kids aren't very interesting. The you character has basically nothing really going on personality wise, and then the other character is just like a weird psycho. The only thing he seems to care about is his girlfriend, which, as an audience, you can't really empathize with because his girlfriend is like not really a character. The princess is a little bit more in the other world. Just because she's on screen more, I guess she feels more real. But his girlfriend, who is like her whole, she's a prop basically. Her only role in the movie is to motivate these other two characters, mainly the Haru character. She's on screen for in total probably less than 5 minutes, and all she does is constantly be almost killed so that the other guy will do stuff. But for some reason, when she first she gets stabbed, and then when she recovers from getting stabbed, she gets a brain tumor. And for some reason, the Haru character immediately just again like as much time as they spend just talking about shit, he just kind of in an instant decides, and actually in this case he's wrong, but he for some reason decides that murdering the princess in the other world will for some reason save his girlfriend in the real world. It makes no sense why he thinks this, because the only thing he knows about the mechanics of how this whole cross-world thing works is that killing them in one world kills them in the other world too. So it makes absolutely no sense why he thinks this, but it's the driving force of like the plot from this point forward. Even stranger is that apparently we find out later that the antagonist, a big part of his plan is that the Haru character will murder the princess, even though he did nothing. It's not like he convinced the character to think that killing the princess will in some way help his girlfriend. He just came to that conclusion on its own, and it was really convenient for the bad guy. But yeah. So at a certain point, the two go to this other world and go. You know, they're bouncing back and forth between the real world and the fantasy world. And at a certain point, the bad guys, who are this really nebulously defined group, well, I say group. The way they talk about them early on, before they make an on-screen appearance, they're called like the Black Banners or something. They sound like some kind of like club or something, you know, like underground enemies of the kingdom. But it turns out they're like a full-blown army, which really raises the question of what the fuck this king is doing wrong if this many people are in rebellion against him. Um, and actually, we see the king as kind of a gullible idiot, so. Anyway, at a certain point, they attack the city. I'm not like walking you through the whole plot, obviously, chronologically. I'm just saying thoughts. Um, and I thought while watching it, it's like, okay, this movie's pretty dull so far, but it looks like something's finally like kind of happening. This big battle. Uh, but then I paused the movie to go to the bathroom and realized that it was an hour in when this battle started, which meant that there was 40 more minutes. This is when I realized the movie's an hour and 40 minutes. So this final battle is like 40 minutes long. That's like longer than Helm's Deep in the second Lord of the Rings film. Um, I have a million things that keep interrupting this filming. Um, I'm just gonna keep rolling with it though. So yeah, so the final battle is happening. It's like 40 minutes long. With little like breaks, not like uninterrupted, like they go back to the real world midway through the fight. I don't even remember why. Um, they they are also like constantly talking about things. This movie does the same thing as the Nino Kuni games, which is that it wants to have like a kind of anti-war message in it, but written by someone who hasn't really given much thought to what their anti-war message is. That happens in the games as well, and once the big war concept kicks in, that kind of is in here a little bit too. Uh, Talking about the concept of war, but with no real concept of nothing really to say about it other than it's bad. um, the battle. So something else happens during the battle. So the two kids are like on opposite sides of this war, because one of the kids is just like a psycho, who immediately jumps to the belief that murdering this girl will for no reason save his girlfriend's life. Um, and he starts he's running around and he's so here's the thing. For no reason, once the kids are in the magical world, they are like extremely powerful, skilled like swordsmen. There's literally no explanation in the movie for it. It's just like at one point they're put into an arena and told to fight like 20 people. Um and then they just do, and they just wait. Like these are like high school students in the real world, and for like no reason, they're just like the strongest warriors in the land as soon as they arrive. Uh, and so they both join this war, and they're on opposite sides of it. And again, they're like the strongest warriors in both of these kingdoms. Not both these kingdoms, because the other guys, like I said, I think are supposed to be like rebels. But um, and it seems like part way through this, they realize that that makes no sense, and so because like one of the kids is just like slicing the Haru kid is just like slicing through the soldiers of the enemy army, and it seems like they realize that this makes no sense. So rather than change it, they they add in this line where even the kid acknowledges that it makes no sense, and then another guy is like, "Oh, the armor you're wearing." We're like just like told this midway through the battle. He's like, "The armor you're wearing makes you like super strong, and that's why you're like able to beat all these soldiers." Which just makes it even stranger that they would think to put that line in there, because there's still no explanation for why they were able to beat all those guys in the arena before. And then the other kid doesn't have special armor that makes him super strong, but then they fight later and it's like they're like evenly matched. So it's this line that's put in there almost as an explanation, but actually just makes it even like highlight even more because it doesn't really explain anything. It just draws more attention to it. Um, but that, yeah, oh my god, speaking of like them realizing something isn't working and then not really solving the problem. Partway through this, it's one of the funniest scenes. Like, this isn't going to sound very funny, I don't think, but it was super funny to me when I watched it. I might even have to edit in a clip here so you guys can, like, anyone watching this can kind of see what I mean when I say this. There's this part where they're in the hospital. They're back in the real world. And they're just kind of both standing there, and they're just like talking about, you know, what's happening with like the princess and the high school chick. And they're just yelling at each other about this thing. And then like they kind of finish the conversation, but not really, and it just cuts from these two standing there talking about this girl and this battle to another scene where it's those two standing there yelling at each other about this battle, but now they're outside. It's like they just cut from one shot of them doing that to basically the exact same scene with nothing in between, because it almost feels like they realize that this is incredibly tedious, this whole story and all these conversations between these two. But rather than edit it to tighten it up and make it more exciting. They just have the characters teleport to another conversation to finish another location to finish their conversation. I feel like it's not going to make. I feel like I'm going to have to put like kind of the clip in there to make any sense of that. But um, it probably won't be as fun. It's very funny when you're like as bored as I was at this point in the film. Um, so then like the other big scene I want to talk about, because we're almost to like the end of the movie here, really is just like there's a scene. There's almost two scenes that are like this back to back, where like you can see how in a totally different, like I guess a different director, uh, with an editor, maybe you could make this more exciting. Because like at one point while they're in the real world, they start getting chased by like a giant spider, and they're in a car and they're driving away, and that sounds exciting. Except even there, they're just delivering straight exposition. Like they forget that they're being chased by a giant spider, and they just like re-explain the whole situation that's happening again and just deliver more exposition. And then they go to the like the throne room where like the whole final bit of the movie is happening, and they just like it's like a 10-minute long scene. It at least feels like 10 minutes, where all the characters in the whole movie are just standing around and they're all just explaining the plot of the movie. The bad guy reveals himself and he just explains like his whole backstory. The bad guy, by the way, it's crazy obvious. It's like this is a kid's movie, but I feel like even a kid would know from like the first scene with this guy that he's clearly the actual bad guy. It's like the wizard dude. Um, he's like the hidden bad guy, and it's revealed. But it's like I think even a kid would understand, and like that's clearly just the bad guy. But they drag out the reveal that he's the bad guy for ages. They stand around talking about it, and then he reveals he's the bad guy, and he gives his whole backstory. I just like completely stopped paying attention after a while. Um, his backstory is hilarious, by the way. As far as I understand it, I think he I think his corpse learned necromancy and brought himself back to life or something like that. It's just nonsense. It's this nonsense. Um, there's this one bit in there that I think it's a good I want to talk about because it's kind of emblematic of the whole way the movie is written. Where in this scene, I think like part of the reveal of figuring out he's the bad guy again, even though it's obvious, like it's just dragged out. They bring up this concept that magic has a distinct smell, which is such a weird detail that I kind of love it. Like I would love another story. Like I've never heard anything like that, and in another story, that could be a really fun element. Is if magic had a distinct scent. It would be very funny, especially if the scent was very, very bad. Like if wizard, like a fantasy world where wizards just stink of magic, and everyone hates them because they just like smell gross all the time. That would be great. So yeah, I unironically actually love that odd little detail that magic has a distinct scent in this setting. Um, but it's even but it's a good indication of the way the movie's exposition is handled because again it's like people have been doing magic throughout a lot of this story. The kids have been magically teleporting back and forth the whole time. So if magic had a sense, they had plenty of time to like set that up organically. The kids smelling the magic and then like noticing the smell on the guy or something like that. You know what I mean? Like they could have set that up and they could have revealed it in a more interesting and clever way. But instead, you're just told it the moment you need to know it, and it's just blandly stated by one character, and then it's immediately used to resolve the thing that's happening, and then they move on, and it's like, yeah, see, like, you had kind of enough to make a decently entertaining story here, and you just kind of refuse to do it because just a love of exposition and a lack of, like, fast-paced editing, fast pace. The movie did not need to be 100 minutes long. Yeah, and then that scene just goes on and on and on, just like this video. Um, uh, yeah. So then, yeah, they kind of just do things, and then the story wraps up pretty quick once they fight the giant monster. Which, by the way, I have no idea what was even happening towards the end. Um, the guy dies at the end, and conveniently his body turns into like a portal back to the real world. The princess character just again just knows that that's a portal to the other world. He's like a Zelda boss, you know, in Zelda games, whenever the boss die, not in every Zelda game, but a lot of the time when the bosses die in Zelda, for some reason, like a portal just appears in the boss chamber that takes them out. That's what this guy does. His corpse transforms into a portal back to the real world, um, which I think is also kind of funny. It's a that's what's gonna happen when I die. Um, so that's basically the end of the movie until we get to the last bit, okay? And this last bit was so wild to me. It's the reason I decided I wanted to make a video about this. All right, this movie has a twist ending. Ooh, twist ending. So the one kid Haru, he goes to the portal and goes home, and then the other kid Yu stays in the magic world, so he can bang the princess. I thought that his motivation to stay in the magic world again would have something to do with the fact that he can walk in the magic world, but no, it's just so he can fuck this princess, which I guess is an alright reason to stay too. But he anyway, so the other kid goes back to the his world, and he finds out that that kid's gone and that like everything's basically fine, and then I am confident, with less than a minute left in the movie before the credits start rolling. It's possible it's more, but I genuinely think it might be less than a minute. I might check when I'm done making this. The kid figures out, and by figures out I mean he just suddenly knows this and states it, and we're supposed to accept it as a fact that the you kid, the wheelchair kid, is him from the fantasy world, that they are parallel versions of each other, and that the wheelchair kid traveled from his world to the real world years ago when they were children to rescue him from a dog. He just says all of this, and then the movie ends. It's utter nonsense. Like, it makes literally no sense, and it's all just explained in less than a minute, and then roll credits. So, like, the kid, first of all, the only thing we really know about the idea, how the kid traveled, or why he's in a wheelchair from his world when he was a child to the real world, just not even interested in explaining that. He just did. I mean, you can't explain it. This is, but we also know we know very little about how this, and by we know, I mean that the writers didn't, there isn't much to it. But the people from the two parallel worlds look alike, because we only have seen every example of it we see in the movie. They look alike. They look exactly alike. Like, they to the point where they thought that the princess was the high school chick, because they look identical with different hair. I mean, they're anime characters, so they all kind of look alike. But you and Haru do not look alike. There is never any comment from anyone about how similar they look. And by the rules we've been given, they should look identical, but maybe with different hair. Nope. The one thing we know about it, this guys. The only reason that the Haru kid gives for thinking this, and by the way, when I say thinking this, you can tell from the way it's written that this is supposed to be true. As far as the movie is concerned, This isn't him theorizing. This is supposed to be the plot. But as far as the only evidence he gives for why he seems to think this is that they were both attracted to not the same girl. Actually, the way the movie handles that's pretty weird too. It's never really clear whether or not the U kid is actually into the high school chick, or rather the Haru kid. The way it's written, it feels like the U kid is maybe supposed to be attracted to the high school chick, but it just comes off like the Haru guy is kind of crazy and obsessed with his girlfriend. Um, but Haru hooks up with the high school chick, and he hooks up with the princess chick from her world. Um, that's it. That's the only connection, and that based on that alone, we're supposed to assume these two are parallel beings. And by the way, the only connection, the princess, we don't see almost, we see almost nothing of the high school chick. We see a little bit more, just a touch more, of the princess. But even from the little bit of both of them we see, we know these two aren't alike either. The only thing we're told that actually connects them as being the same person is that they both like oranges. That is literally it. Is that they both like oranges. We never even see the high school chick eat an orange. We're just told that she likes oranges. But that it's so nonsensical and it happens so quick, and the movie treats it like this is what ties the whole story together. That Haru and you are the same person from different parallel worlds. And it's just utter nonsense. It's the most fucked attempt I've ever seen of adding a kind of twist like this at the end, because it just makes no sense, and the movie treats it like this beautiful realization that ties the whole story together. Yeah, no, I couldn't believe it after that happened. Like, I was pretty, like I said, checked out and just waiting for the movie to end, and then that started happening in the last minute, and I was like, okay, I gotta come in here and talk about this shit because it's insane that is how the movie just ended. I don't know. It's not gonna be it's not gonna sound as funny, I'm sure, as it felt watching it. But I almost want to say watch the movie just so you can get to the end and understand why I reacted this way to this twist ending. But I really wouldn't recommend it. The movie is just dull. That's the problem. The movie's just dull. Um, yeah.